So, let me first of all start and kickstart this panel on cybersecurity and application of artificial intelligence to cybersecurity. So as you heard in the fireside chat with Sumit Dhawan, who is right now CEO of a company focused on cybersecurity, it's a space where there is huge chance of application of artificial intelligence. As Gyani pointed out, there are a huge number of startups as well. So we'll today get a little bit more deeper into it and cover cybersecurity and artificial intelligence from two different perspectives. One would be the use cases and the enterprise perspective. Where do we see the market opportunity? What are the challenges customers are seeing? And that is something where we'll be getting a lot of inputs from our friends from KPMG. I'm going to introduce them in a minute. And then there is a technical aspect of it about really doing what is called product development. And that is something where we'll be getting some insights from Vijay Ganti from VMware, who's actually leading an effort. So without further ado, let me first introduce the panelists. We have Sreekar Krishna. Some of you may be familiar with him. He was a speaker in our TICON Artificial Intelligence track this year in the Enterprise AI panel. Phenomenal job. Sreekar is a PhD in Artificial Intelligence from Arizona State University and is doing some phenomenal work in the area of Artificial Intelligence at KPMG. Vijay Jajoo, he is at KPMG looking into the cybersecurity space, and I'm really thankful to KPMG for sending two very qualified people who are not just dabbling but actually are looking at separately from AI perspective in general and then cybersecurity overall. So the mingling of the two ideas is where the beauty of the panel will be. And we have Vijay Ganti, who reports to the chief security, the person who runs the security business unit of VMware, Tom Kahn, a known name in the industry. Vijay has worked at at VMware. We love KPMG. Sorry you could not get an offer there. So VMware, he previously worked at EMC for a long period of time. Vijay has an interesting perspective when he talks about topics where he can easily bring business insights into technology insights, and that has to do with his prior educational background. He's an undergrad from IIT Bombay and an MBA from IIM Lucknow. So with this introduction, we'll like now to start the panel. And my first question would be to Vijay Jajoo and Sreekar Krishna from KPMG about, hey, from your perspective, we had a lot of discussions today on different topics in artificial intelligence. We'd like to hear from you, what is that you're seeing out there in the industry in terms of the key use cases where you see enterprises adopting cybersecurity with AI-based solutions. What kind of industry verticals you are seeing adoption? We understand that it has not yet reached the level where you can basically talk about multi-billion-dollar revenue streams coming in, but at least we have an indicator what is going to work and what not. So,
can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So, thanks, Tushar. I think if you think about from organization and enterprises like Fortune 100, Fortune 250 companies, whether InfoSec rolls up under a CTO or CIO, this is a board level topic. And ultimately the question that the leader has to answer, how confident you are or how secure you are. So can I establish that level of trust? And that leader, whether it's a CTO, a CIO, or CISO, whoever this function is running, they have to have a level of understanding and the data to confidently articulate that. The number one complaint that we get from the board members is like 78% of those technology leaders are not able to demonstrate or articulate with confidence or with data about the level of security. So it takes them 30 days of PowerPoint or what have you to come up with that. So answer like Tushar very specifically with that preamble, it is very important for the technology leader to able to look at their landscape from their front office to middle office to back office to really connect those data sets and derive intelligence. And then we can definitely get into more specific use cases. And that's where the gap in and the opportunity is right now. It's very siloed, it's a very fragmented market. Lots of toys and lots of tools, not enough intelligence.
I completely agree.
So I think that's the opportunity, but definitely love to get into more detail.
Right, and Sreekar, from your perspective, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So perfect. And actually, Vijay and I work together in we have launched this cyber AI program within KPMG by working together, by really sharing our thoughts together, right? I mean, you know, when we come from an AI perspective, for us it is about insights given very large volumes of data. Cyber is a perfect example. There's so much data that is being collected from the website where you go log in to the IP address where the transaction is going in bits and packets. There is no intelligence that is connecting the two. People who are, I mean, I log in from my laptop and I have my VPN on, then it thinks it's a different IP address. I log in on the same website from my phone, it thinks it's a different IP address. You know, if you go into big institutions, very big financial institutions today, they're still using 1980 rule sets to catch all of these potential miscreants, who themselves have become AI enabled. They've gone on Amazon Cloud or Google Cloud and they are launching all of these attacks in fractional speed. And these institutions are not ready to tackle all of those things. And guess what? The funding doesn't come down to cybersecurity a lot of times because we're putting money in the product side. And cybersecurity for a lot of time has been thought of as a back office compliance function where you just do check marks saying I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. If a regulator walks in, I'll give them a scorecard. That has changed. When Vijay talked about trust, that's what we hear, right? If a bank gets attacked by cyber criminals, no longer do customers care about whether you have your scorecard or not. They're going to say, I'm going to take my money and go somewhere else, or I'm going to take my business and go somewhere else. That is really what is facing the industry today, which is that it has come out of the woodwork where it was just a compliance function to really be a product function, trust as a product. How do we deliver trust as a product if I'm a digital company? Especially now, everybody is going to digital channels. So that your digital footprint is increasing as an enterprise. How are you going to protect yourself and how are you going to build that trust with your customer if you don't react at the speed at which attackers are coming to you? That's really what is happening.
That's very interesting perspective. So now moving from that, in terms of the maturity of the solutions you are seeing in the market, what's your perspective in terms of the level of maturity of solutions when it comes to enterprise adoption?
Yeah, I think if you think about like the large enterprise at Fortune 500, each of them have at least 30 to 40 different security tools in their portfolio. And it's of course varied degrees of maturity. And there are few of them that they are more confident, more mature. The biggest gap they have, again, they're sort of operating in many different silos. So let's just decompose that. So hey, I have a CASB solution, I have endpoint protection solution, I have authentication solutions, I have an identity and provisioning solution, and the list goes on. And where organizations still struggle, three big areas. There is still a level of maturity in the journey. The whole space of identity and access management. There is a significant amount of innovation and investments that have happened. That is the single most pain point large enterprises still have. So how do I take my enterprise workforce as well as my customer identity? Two different dimensions. Second, I think about from a end-to-end data protection. In that space itself, and I will add telemetry to data. So do I have visibility when you talk about like billions of records and billions of data points that I can gather and make an informed decision? It's been compounded by the whole open API economy in the fintech world where I'm sharing all my data with GDPR and CCPA. Do I know who am I sharing my data with different third parties, and can I track it through the APIs, what's going in and out? Number three is a big pain point from a use case and the areas from a maturity perspective is all your device fingerprinting and endpoint protection primarily. The majority of the vulnerabilities and the attacks are because somebody has exploited an unpatched system. So when I look at these three domains, you will see a varied degree of maturity, and it's also a dependency on the organization itself, where IT is that mature or not. Do they have the right leadership? Do they have the right investments? But you're seeing the different levels of degrees of maturity in these three dimensions.
Perfect. So now let me turn this a little bit more technical from the perspective of product development. And Vijay Ganti is leading that for VMware in their security business unit. Vijay, give us a perspective on application of AI across the security stack. Which parts of the stack it is playing into?
It's a big question, I think. Can you guys hear me? Okay. First of all, I think just add to what the other panelists said. I kind of say there are only two kinds of organizations, ones that have been breached and ones that don't know it yet. So, and we laugh, but it's a sad state of affairs. Security is just not working. It's the $100 billion of security products out there. We are investing at a faster rate than we are investing in IT. So dollars are there as well. But the only thing that's growing faster than our investment is security losses, right? So that's going at 2.5. Okay, you can't hear me? Okay. Is this better? Okay. So security losses are growing at 2.5 times the security investment. So this kind of ties into, it's not money that's the problem, we're just not doing something correct. And one of the problems is the complexity that my namesake alluded to, which is every CISO, my numbers indicate, has 60 to 70 security products. It's a complex domain. Each of these are deeply technical things, and to make sense out of 70 products and make them work for you is not easy. Complexity is the bane of security. In fact, where I think AI would go and where it can apply is to actually simplify this mess. Right? That's the Uber idea. And within that idea, I think there are very specific places where it starts to deliver immediate value. People in the networking domain specifically have started to have an impact because they see large amount of data, right? So network detection and response is one area you will see vendors like Darktrace, Vectra, who are essentially AI-driven network detection and response. So that's one specific area. Now, AI kind of breaks into insecurity into two broad categories. One is detecting if something is anomalous, right? And not every anomaly is bad, but that's one category of solutions. The other category is where you understand specifically that this looks like a threat, which is a classification problem. You kind of train your models on a specific class of threat, and whenever it sees the fingerprint of that threat, it kind of alerts you. That is more accurate in general, but again, it doesn't detect new kinds of things, right? So you are seeing in threat detection, a lot of AI being applied. Silence is an example of that. Other endpoint vendors are as well doing this. So these are point solutions, but then there are people who are trying to make sense out of this data, what are called SIM solutions, security information event management solutions. That's a mouthful. And the reason that exists is because you have these 70 products which are all throwing data, and you have only few people who can look at only one screen, right? So you can't have one guy looking at 70 screens and making sense out of it. So they look at just one screen, which is called a SIM solution. SIM solutions need to put together a 360-degree view across these 70 systems to this one guy or a few gals who are looking at it. AI is being applied to thread together a story for this particular person, right? That's what's happening today, and there's a lot more that will happen in future.
That's a very interesting perspective, Vijay, and especially on the security operating center side, which is where a lot of AI has to be applied. I will actually literally come to what is called a billion-dollar question in a minute. But before that, from KPMG folks, when you are looking at security space, traditionally you have seen a lot of blacklisting solutions being deployed. What's your perspective on the success, adoption, and industry feedback on blacklisting solutions? There's a reason I'm asking this question to lead to something else in a minute.
So is that $1 billion? Give it to me, or
no. I would not have been sitting here.
Yeah. So there is no silver bullet. So even blacklisting or whitelisting is a part of the toolkit, but I think none of the CISOs or the CTOs are relying on that solely. Right now, where organizations are moving, at least the leading ones, are going in a more contextual manner. So the biggest thing for them is, am I really managing my risk? So you want to beat, it's a cat and mouse game, right? So my favorite cartoon was Tom and Jerry when I was growing up, but that's the only cartoon you could watch in India back then. So now I've run like some of the biggest war rooms and breach response for in the world, biggest hacks. What you're trying to do is like deter the bad guy. You're trying to make their life more miserable, more difficult. So you're trying to like make sure you have layers of defense. In terms of the contextual part, yes, using the blacklisting, whitelisting, but you have to have the context. And the answer you need is like, what's my risk posture? What's my level of risk that am I able to accept? So for example, a big a Fortune 100 client, they had a massive account takeover attack. So that is like stolen credentials, tried on this website, and they see a massive spike in their volume. They know they're losing money. They have all sorts of blacklisting rules, even where they actually sell the customer information, say, hey, is that customer's contract has been stolen, and credentials have been stolen or not. But still, they are getting attacked by the account takeover, credential attack. And this is going on for a few days, and they make some changes with their blacklisting. Against the bad guys figure that out and have the answers for that. So what this organization is really focused on, a massive investment, and by the way, their fraud was $9 million. This is a multi-trillion-dollar organization. $9 million is a change. They don't really need to care. So it wasn't about $9 million. It was about how that $9 million was made up. Was it money laundering? Where was that money going? So for them to think about an end-to-end risk engine with ML, with AI enabled, that I can have a 360 view about from my devices, from my network, to the type of data it's been gathering. Can I grab the behavior, the transactional data, the billing system data, to really have that view? Then I can have a much better confidence to say, is this a good or bad? Should I ask for a challenge and an authentication? Can I have a step-up authentication? You don't want to piss off your customer that, hey, I'm transferring $5,000 to my wife every month. Don't ask me 5 more passwords. Then you are like upsetting me. If you start having,
he wants to verify that you're exactly sending to your wife. That's a very big question.
So I think blacklisting is not like the only layer. Yes, organizations have had that, but they've moved down to the contextual level and really driving that level of analytics, and hence the ML and AI capabilities have become that much more relevant, because guess what? The attackers actually are using ML and AI. So if we don't get smarter than them, they are going to outsmart us.
Makes sense. So now let me come to literally $1 billion question. VMware acquired Carbon Black for $2.1 billion. Not million, $1 billion. It's a company which is focused on application whitelisting. Vijay, of course, Ganti was involved, must have been involved, I don't know, in the due diligence and acquisition of the company, since the person whom he works for is the right-hand man of CEO of the company when it comes to security vision. One of the biggest acquisitions in security space that we've heard in recent past, based upon, of course, publicly available non-confidential information. We'd like to hear from you the philosophical approach of application whitelisting. Certainly not a bulletproof solution, but one solution. And how do you see that part of the industry emerging? How do you see VMware and whatever you can say, and other players playing it out, and Carbon Black transforming the security landscape coming along with VMware?
Okay, big question again. Yes, $2.1 billion. First of all, I think Carbon Black used to be a whitelisting solution. That's how it started, but it is not just that. In fact, the bigger portion of the business is endpoint protection, which includes next-gen antivirus. It includes what's called endpoint detection and response, and a whole host of other functionality, right? So the way I would phrase it is that when you're trying to secure something, even our homes, there are 2 kinds of things we do. We put locks on our doors, right? That way we shrink the attack surface, right? And the second thing we do is we have cops who are trying to look for bad guys. So you kind of lock people up and understand what bad guys do. Security is very similar. We have tools that shrink the attack surface, which is why you need authentication, you have firewalls and things like that. And then you have a lot of security companies who are trying to understand what bad guys do, what they look like, whether it's signatures, whether it's behaviors, you're detecting those patterns, right? If you look at infrastructure providers like VMware, we understand how to shrink the attack surface because we understand what the applications need. Let me just say a little bit more about that. If you were to lock down the pathways that application uses, then the application breaks, right? If A has to talk to B to work, you can't block that down. So infrastructure that understands the application can open up the right pathways and block the ones that are not used. So I think that's one dimension. So we said, okay, VMware is very good or should get very good at putting locks at the right places. But if you want to be a full stack security vendor, we also need technologies that understand what bad guys do and look like. And so by acquiring Carbon Black, we essentially have this full stack solution that kind of locks your assets down at the same time as looking for people who get in, who are able to pick those locks, if you will, right? And that's the whole rationale right now, the $2.1 billion rationale. But yeah, I mean, it's going to go much beyond that. Hope that answers.
Very interesting question, answer. And so let's moving on to a slightly different way of looking at it. And this will be for you, Sreekar. You worked in artificial intelligence and computer vision, very interesting technology. I myself worked in AI 20 years back that was more on pattern recognition. And AI has been around for 50 plus years. A lot of work has already been done in different areas of AI, from NLP, computer vision, image processing, stuff like that. And blockchain is coming on slowly, getting applied to AI as well. Now let's pick up security. Looking at security problems and breaking them down into different parts and subparts. How do you see some of that original research which has already been done or solutions which have been already done in different parts of AI transforming to cybersecurity and people leveraging it? How do you see that kind of leverage actually happening?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tushar. Like, one of the, actually 8 out of 10 CISOs we speak to, more than talking about external attacks, they're worried about insider threat, right? And think about insider threat is such a complex landscape. I mean, it's your own employee, it's your own person working in the institution, they're doing something, and it's so hard to track it because it could be anything. It could be that, yeah, they had a bad performance review and now they're doing something to sabotage. It could be that they had an external threat from somewhere else and they decided to use company data to satisfy it. When you look at a complex problem like insider threat, yes, there's no silver bullet solution for it. The amount of data that you have to really understand in order to even take an action or even perceive where to start taking an action itself is hard. Like just take reverse IP logs. These things produce like terabytes and terabytes of data within the corporate side of the company. And there is no meaningful way today, at least, where you can go and start seamlessly attaching those logs to activities that people are doing, whether they are business transactional activity, whether they are developer activity, or it is call center activity. There's not seamless solutions like that. And this is where AI can play a huge role, is like bringing up these behaviors that it monitors and attaching those behaviors to patterns, like saying, this is a call center employee who has to access personal data for the calls. I'm not saying that there aren't solutions out there already like this, but how do we make sure that that person is not doing something untoward and collecting some data that they should not be touching? I mean, there are some tools out there today that helps do such things, but to Vijay's point, it's not tied all together to really come out and say, this is where you need to pay attention more. And I can tell you, insider threat is a complex area, and more institutions are worrying about it, given that my digital landscape is going to continue to evolve. I'll come to the company through my cell phone, I'll come to the corporate through laptop, I might go to China and log in from there. How do you make sure that I'm not doing something? And that's where AI really plays a huge opportunity.
We'll have questions at the end, but you'll be the first person who will get a chance. I'll make sure that.
Tushar, I will add is like just to decompose from an audience perspective, right? You look at as I gave kind of 3 areas, and I think there are more. I was talking about like identity, the authentication area, talking about the data, and also the, let's say, endpoint. So I think as Vijay Ganti also talked about kind of the endpoint protection. And you can break it down further in terms of phishing is the biggest cause of all the ransomware, the malware. So there is big from an AI component really happening. In the antivirus space that you're talking about, like, hey, again, that's an area that's very signature-based, getting into very algorithm and pattern-based. Network analysis, huge domain where significant amount of data you're able to generate, detect, and response. Where the ML and AI hasn't gone is in cybersecurity, I would say the lower in the maturity is like, am I able to predict, so like insider threat, if before somebody gets fired, can I get, how do I know this person is actually going to get rolled? And can I block their IP? Can I start putting a DLP agent for them and start really monitoring what this person is doing before even that person submitted resignation? So I think there is an evolution. When you think about the basic issues and the risk and the threats that are happening, organizations are still struggling with the basic vulnerability management. So there are some basic IT hygiene issues that the Fortune 100, Fortune 500 organizations are grappling with. And they're all experimenting, how do I use ML and AI to solve those challenges? But there are definitely some of these very specific use cases or the areas that I was just mentioning, account takeover, passwordless authentication, and on the endpoint related protection, phishing being another one, command and control, malware detection. Those are definitely areas where a significant amount of ML and AI is being used because you have massive amount of data sets and insider threat.
So Vijay, from your side, Vijay Ganti, would like to know a little bit more about different kind of models which are more frequently used in other spaces in AI that are getting transferred to cybersecurity domain. A little bit more from that particular research perspective.
Sure. So I think the background for this is, I think most of the recent AI developments have been limited to a few specific domains: speech processing, NLP, image processing, video, recommendation systems, so on and so forth. And actually not too much more than that. A lot of the developments have not been applied to cybersecurity. And cybersecurity has some very unique challenges, which are different from some of these domains. It is adversarial. Usually you don't have an active adversary in a lot of the other domains that I talked about. You're not writing stuff just so that nobody understands it, right? You write stuff so that people can understand. The second big problem you have with cybersecurity, which is different from some of this, is that there's lack of labeled data sets. When you train a particular model, you have to say, these 100,000 things are bad, right? This is malicious. You need somebody to be able to say, these are bad. Who does that? So it's not available to organizations. So given these challenges have to be addressed. Everything that has been done in AI so far need to be applied to this domain. So a few things that apply relatively directly are things for anomaly detection, for instance, right? So you can apply that where you're saying, this is my normal and this is different from normal. But that doesn't work really well because it has a lot of false positives. The things that we need to build more and more is how you can learn from a large data set and then transfer, somebody referred to transfer learning at some point, and transfer to a specific task with a smaller data set. So that's something that we need to, I think we are trying to figure out how to do that. Graphs is one area where, graph-based networks is something which security specifically requires, because I think Microsoft says this really well, is that defenders, us, think in terms of lists, right, which is what we were referring to, but attackers think in terms of graphs, right? So we need to start thinking in terms of graphs to be able to detect attacks. We need to be able to say, one happened, that's not bad, that's okay, but because two happened after one, now 1 and 2 are seriously bad. So you need to be able to connect those nodes with those edges, right? And that intelligence is required. A lot of us are doing some of that work.
So one very specific thing which I want to ask you, Vijay Ganti, is zero-day attacks, right? Biggest problems in security. You get attacked by a system with viruses which have never been seen before. You essentially are playing in a zone where you're just basically trying to do analysis with limited amount of data. I mean, theoretically in artificial intelligence, if you have infinite time, like any other engineering problem, and good amount of data, you can crack everything. That doesn't happen, right? That's an area where there's a huge scope for application of AI. And these systems have to also do what is called self-learning. If there is a very known virus and you figure out a way to decipher it, if the attacker just changes the virus a little bit and attacks you, you'll be able to still figure it out. So we'd like to get your thoughts on self-learning systems, zero-day attacks, how AI is playing out in this space.
Yeah, I think this is a hard problem to solve. Fundamentally, all AI technologies are learning from past data and trying to predict future. And if the future is significantly different from past, we won't be able to predict it, right? So I think it's almost a given in some sense. And it's been talked about quite a bit. But the premise is this, that there are certain things that are invariant across attacks no matter how you change it, And the question is, can you detect some of those things, right? The traditional signatures that people write or the way they describe attacks are very granular and very specific. And all an attacker has to do is modify one of those steps just slightly. Instead of going to one directory, goes to some other directory and the rule breaks. This is what was the problem with traditional antivirus as well. The way they would work, just very quickly, is that they will take a hash of a file, and if one bit of that file is changed, the hash changes. So these guys will evade it. So if you compare at that level, it becomes very brittle. So you cannot predict from future from the past. On the other hand, if you are learning the behavior, let's say, of that file, then attackers try to do the same things. For instance, they try to steal data, they try to laterally move, they try to infiltrate. If your constructs are that high level, right, that abstract, then usually they would be invariant across new attacks as well. They still have to achieve those goals. So the goal of AI, and the premise is that AI will be able to learn those invariant characteristics far better than the traditional rules. Is it doing a good job? I think it's better than rules. It can be circumvented, and this is where I think this GANs or adversarial networks and all those things come in. But I think they can do a far better job than what traditional systems can do.
Good. So what we will do now is, our next session is at 2:15. We'll probably take a few extra minutes before we start. The session started a little late, and there's been a lot of interest in cybersecurity during the fireside chat also. So we'll now open it to the audience, and as promised, John, right? John. Yeah. Why don't we let you have the first question? We can get a mic to him. And we also have to give you a chance because you're a good friend of Radhika.
Yeah. So thanks for those insights.
We can stand up and announce your name.
Sure.
That'd be great.
Stand up? Yeah.
That's a request.
So my name's Jordan, as Tushar has mentioned. So Radhika and I have just recently written a book, and one of the areas that we looked at was cybersecurity. And something that was very interesting that came out was that in the enterprise, a lot of these successful attacks come from spear phishing, right? So doing some kind of getting to a system administrator, basically, somebody that has the right to the system and should be able to do a lot, and then you take over that account. So doing an account takeover, and then launching some kind of malware or ransomware or something like this. So the question is, that's a very short amount of time, right? The amount of time it takes to do the takeover and then launch malware can be a few seconds. So how would you use AI or ML in order to look at that kind of behavior? Because you have a very small period of time in order to do something.
Yeah. I can go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
It's great. We all have answers. So
go ahead.
Be happy.
No, we don't. I actually don't. So go ahead.
No, I mean it's a great question, Jordan. And actually, the way I think about it, at least, is that it's not just a AI solution alone, but it is a design thinking, at least. At least the way I think about it, right? Like when we think about admins who have very high privileges, it's as important that we protect them from themselves. And at that point, like, we have to think about the whole end-to-end of, like, how do we bring them into the loop as soon as something like this happens. And today we see a lack of strategy there, at least, where an ATO happens or an account takeover happens on an admin. It's months sometimes before they even figure out something has happened. So if you have very proactive algorithms that are monitoring behaviors of employees, and this kind of ties back into the insider threat, which is how can I model the behavior of my own corporate employees and also the behavior of the customers. We have spent a lot of time modeling behavior of customers from a monetization standpoint. We have done very little in terms of understanding behavior of employees from the standpoint of, can I, in a design thinking way, preempt that there might be something going on. You are not at your laptop, you're not at your phone, but there's activity going on, which is not a prescribed activity. What's going on? I mean, these are some of the areas. I mean, it might even fall outside of AI, but AI can help because we are now building these deep behavioral models. And Vijay Ganti brought up GAN. How can we bring up all these adversarial learning networks, which can then even model that attack and see how we can proactively go after those solutions.
So two quick examples. As I said, we run like the big war rooms and investigations. So one of my breach war room that I ran and helped the CIO all the way to congressional hearing was an exact same scenario where out of 70,000 people company, the spear phishing attack was to one individual. So sophisticated, and she happened to have keys to kingdom. 2.5 months, the bad guys were inside. And the logs were going out. Now, ML and the AI systems, if they were using, they had 15,000 different models running in the company. But guess what? Even those 15,000 models were not talking to each other. 5% was being used. 2.5 months, the bad guys were taking the data out. They didn't notice. And 17,000 AD group memberships were changed on a day. And then somebody said, I think we should take a look at it because 17,000 group memberships changed in one day. And who did that? And so forget ML AI. So that's one scenario where now we work with that organization to put the entire ML architecture together to don't have the same scenario. The other scenario, I'm sure all of us use their app, one of the largest social networking company, not very far from here. Who watches Stranger Things on Netflix? I'm a big fan. Upside Down World. They have created an entire upside down network. So the way you kind of do this, you want to learn some of the behaviors to really understand the adversaries and create those fingerprints of the monitoring, and you are doing an active defense, not just defense. They are able to learn and flip at any given point in time the entire network to say, hey, you know what, the bad guys think they have actually taken over. They have not, and they're learning. So it's a whole, I'm not saying that everybody is doing that. Some of these organizations have the resources and capacities, so you're able to, in a much larger honeypot, we are able to flip, and they actually call it an upside down world.
Yeah, anomaly detection is a big deal. Rajat, make sure you keep your question very short. We know about your company and stuff.
So I have a question for Vijay. You mentioned that blacklisting the hacking rule, setting those rules has been a major pain, and AI can potentially solve that. So my question is that if you have an AI software exactly doing that, without any rule, it is picking up the contextual anomalies, how valuable that will be, and what will be the value drivers for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, it is going to be valuable. But I think that the point we are trying to all say here is that won't be the only silver bullet. So let's just take another example, right? One of our other breach event that happened was primarily related to an exploit, a vulnerability that was exploited at this large organization. It was very much driven by an insider threat, right? And because this lady, she knew the vulnerability on this particular system, she was actually grabbing price list. And she gained access. They never tracked the access. She managed to sell this price list to a competitor. This became a public case. They had to do the massive amount of authentication, authorization, redesign. Now, how will that blacklist problem solve in that scenario? This was a pharma company, big issue, big deal, regulatory, ding on them and what have you. So yes, on the blacklist scenario, yes, it will help, but I think you've got to think about it as an ecosystem. You want to connect your front office to mid office to back office environment. You're looking at what are your top threats and risks that you as a company are facing. Are you being DDoS, account takeover on the front end? Do you have insider threat issues? Do you have authentication, phishing, authorization problem? And then you want to connect these different data sets. So as Vijay mentioned, a lot of organizations are even getting rid of the SIEM solutions, and they're creating their own security data lake. The reason because some of the traditional SIEM solutions have failed to get data out. They're really good in ingesting data, and that's about it. And I'm not going to name names.
No, and wait for humans to be the glue between those tools. And that is the largest challenge they are facing.
That's very good. So let me, guys, given that we are short of time, I have a last question directed to Vijay Ganti. Something on a topic which has been mentioned by Sreekar and other Vijay. Once breaches happen, you have to go and figure out what went wrong. And you have to do a massive amount of data analysis, forensic analysis, stuff like that. FireEye did a very big acquisition, which has become an industry term for it, almost Mandiant. Give us some insights into the kind of work Mandiant does in terms of dealing with security breaches and data breaches after they happen, and the scope for application of AI in that space.
I actually would probably defer to other Vijay. I mean, he runs war rooms for breaches. I think he'll probably give.
I knew Vijay, you're clever, but you really sold it that right now.
No, I think.
Or you could. Or sometimes what I do in this situation says, "Oh, this question is very easy. Even he can answer it."
No. This squarely is. I mean, I don't want to feign expertise when he has one.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think absolutely. So that the whole Mayor platform for Mandiant, and in fact, we work with them and our whole forensics and investigation team. ML is super helpful. So the breach scenario I talked about, where we helped the CIO go all the way to congressional hearing, it was Mandiant and us. We both were coexisting and we helped. And the reason was there's the amount of logs that we had to decipher and collect and make sense out of it. Without the ML models, we wouldn't have done it. So Mayor platform is helping look at the compromises and really make a decision. What next? How do I know that I'm out of trouble? When do I say that the bad guys are no longer in here? So it was a very important decision for us to go to the board and say, yes, you're not going to have a disaster. You don't have a crisis. How do you make the decision? Is it day 23? And for us, it went on day 35 in that scenario. And so we had Mayor platform deployed to look at the sensors, to look at the tampering that was done. On top of that, we used, because the data was all over the place, it was quite an effort to gather all the logs and run the models analytics to really look at the compromises and look at the variations to make a decision, go to the board and say, yes, we believe it's clean. You're out of crisis. We literally had to go all VPs and above, quarantine their machines, the server logs, the endpoints for there to say who has been compromised with the high-risk users. So that may help, along with some of the ML models, to really augment, because it wasn't about the data was nicely at one place. So Mayor could be deployed at a few different places, but it had all sorts of unstructured data at different places, so we had to use the ML models.
Guys, really enjoyed moderating this panel, three gentlemen, bringing in very deep technical perspective. Vijay, thanks for accepting the offer to be a panelist in 24-hour notice.
Thank you.
I would not have been able to do that. And Vijay and Sreekar, both for your participation in the panel and sponsoring the conference. Thanks, Brad. It's been an amazing journey with KPMG. Thank you, guys. Thank you.